And we are live. Welcome to the MongoDB podcast live. Once again, we're going to chat with Garudi Etienne, product manager at MongoDB. We're going to talk about scalability, resilience, and today we're going to focus on sharding. If you had accepted the invite on LinkedIn, apologies. We had some scheduling challenges, so I'm hoping everything comes together. I hope you can join us. We'll be joined by Garudi momentarily. In the meantime, if you're joining us today and you're here to learn about sharding, scalability, renaming shards, resharding, let me know where you're at. And it looks like we're having trouble with LinkedIn. Let's see what's going on. Looks like we're not able to connect to LinkedIn. Let's take a look at YouTube. Looks like we're live. All right. Welcome, folks. Scalability and resilience. Once again, this is the MongoDB podcast live. Welcome. Let us know where you're at. Hello, Damien. It's great to have you. We're going to talk in depth today about scalability and resilience. We'll be joined shortly by Garudi Etienne, product manager at MongoDB, focusing on scalability and resilience. This is part 4 in the series. And today we're going to dive deeply into sharding, which is a feature built into MongoDB. And I figured while we waited, let's get creative here for a moment and ask our good friend ChatGPT what's going on with sharding. So I asked a couple of questions. What is a shard key? But before I asked that, I asked, what is scalability and resilience? ChatGPT seems to know a lot about that. So it says scalability refers to the ability of a system, network, or process to handle growing amount of work or its potential to be enlarged in order to accommodate that growth. And that's what we've learned at the previous live streams when we chatted with our good friend Garudi. And then we're going to get into this in more detail when Garudi joins us in just a moment. But I wanted to share some details from ChatGPT about a shard key. It's a unique identifier that is used to partition the data stored in a collection across multiple servers known as shards. And we covered this in part 3. We talked a little bit about what sharding is. We also talked about clusters and how they're formed. We focused on Atlas. If you're not familiar with MongoDB Atlas, you can follow along today. You can jump in and get a free account at cloud.mongodb.com. It's free to get started. You can launch a free cluster. It's free forever. You don't even have to pull out a credit card to get started. That's part of the fun. So you can join us over here. I'm logged in, and I've got a free cluster spun up. I've got a couple of clusters actually launched. This is my first cluster here. This is a free one, and you can see what's going on. We're going to dive into MongoDB Atlas in a little bit of detail. We're going to show a little bit more about sharding. And of course, Garudi Etienne is going to join us, and we'll get started. I'm curious, though, if you're joining us today, what your level of experience with MongoDB is. How familiar are you with sharding? And are you using MongoDB on-prem, maybe on your laptop, on a server, or are you using it in the cloud in cloud.mongodb.com, which is called Atlas? It's our Atlas database as a service. And with that, I think Garudi is ready. Let's add Garudi to the stream. There he is. Hey, I'm going to ditch
Michael.
a moment. How are you, sir? It's good to see you again. Welcome back.
I am doing well. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well as well. It's good to get you back for part 4. What are we talking about today?
We are talking about resharding, or live resharding to be more specific, and also the ability to rename sharded collections in MongoDB 5.0 onwards.
Awesome. That's great. So we are having a little bit of a problem with LinkedIn.
Oh,
yeah. I'm unfortunately, I don't think we're going to be able to go live on LinkedIn. It doesn't. There we go. Oh, live viewer. We are having trouble posting to LinkedIn. Might be a problem with LinkedIn. Okay, that's a shame. We may have to post this. We'll post the YouTube video in LinkedIn. Unfortunately, if you're trying to get to us from LinkedIn, it's not gonna work today. But jump over to YouTube, and that'll work. So hopefully that'll get resolved. In the meantime, Garuti, give us a little bit of a background for those people that are joining us for the first time. Maybe they didn't see part 1, 2, or 3. They're just joining us today. Who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Garuti. I'm a lead product manager here at MongoDB on the core database, focused on all things scalability.
Mm-hmm. Outstanding. And when you say scalability, what does that mean for MongoDB?
Yeah, for MongoDB, it is about the ability for MongoDB to handle automatically your workload at any scale as it grows from no scale to unlimited scale, making sure that the database, the data platform is able to handle any stage of growth and any size of workload that you throw at it.
Outstanding. Awesome. Well, everybody needs scalability then. I mean, you might be building an application and launching it, and maybe you get a wave of users. It's important to be able to scale to meet the demands. So that's what we're talking about today. Now, there are a couple of different ways that we scale, and we covered that in parts 1, 2, and 3. So we can invite folks to go back and look at those. But as an overview, what are the 2 types of scale that we offer? Scale and resilience.
Yeah, so the 2 major types are vertical scaling and horizontal scaling. Vertical scaling is about just getting more capacity for your machine. So you have a single server, you add more RAM, add more CPU, add more storage to it, just making that bigger and bigger, as big as possible, available in the market. And horizontal scaling is about using commodity machines to add capacity. And so you have one machine, for example, with 4 gigs of RAM. Instead of getting a bigger machine with 8 gigs of RAM, you just get a second machine with 4 more gigs of RAM, and you get 8 gigs that way. Just keep adding machines over and over and over to get unlimited linear scaling.
Outstanding. Okay. And so when we want to scale even further, we can implement sharding, and that's what we're going to focus on today.
Yes.
So maybe an introduction to sharding.
Sure. Yeah. So sharding is the same thing as horizontal scaling. There's no difference in our sense. It's just MongoDB's way of doing that. So sharding is about, once you add those multiple machines to get limitless scale, it's about partitioning your data or your workload across those machines as evenly as possible in order to meet your throughput necessities, if that makes sense. So sharding is about, hey, I have, let's say, 10 terabytes of data. I could add 5 machines, 5 shards, and spread that, 2 terabytes per machine per shard. That way I distribute that evenly so that I can scale my workload and fit as much in memory as possible, or get as much storage as possible, for example, or as much CPU as needed as possible.
Right. Now, there are some requirements in order to implement sharding within MongoDB. Well, I'll say within MongoDB Atlas. I mean, MongoDB as a downloadable open source, open software product, you can implement sharding on-prem in any way, right? Right out of the box, you can begin to create sharding. What does that process look like outside of Atlas?
Yeah. So first, you have to spin up the machines that are necessary for a sharded cluster. So in vertical scaling and replica set, you basically spin up your primary node and your 2 secondary nodes at minimum, and you have replication that way. And so a sharded cluster is the same thing. A replica set is a shard is a replica set. So your first machine is still the primary and your secondaries. And then on top of that, you can spin up a second shard, let's say. So you get another set of primary and secondaries. And then for that, you need a thing called a MongoS or a router. And so what that does is it determines where to send your information. Because you're dividing your data across machines, something needs to know where to send the request you're making, on which machine it's on. And then on top of that, we also have a thing called the config server, which is a source of truth of where all your data lives. So that's where the metadata about your data lives. And that's what permanently holds the information about the cluster. And then the router normally connects to that to cache the information so that you don't have to ping the config server every time you make a request. But that's where the source of truth lives. And so those are the pieces that you need to spin up in order to have a sharded cluster. And then you just add shards over and over, like you would add replica sets, as many as you need.
Okay, so you talked about a lot of things there: a Mongo C, a Mongo configuration server, a Mongo S. These are separate processes that you need to launch and configure if you're doing this on-prem. But the
Correct.
great thing about MongoDB Atlas is that all of that is kind of hidden from you, right?
Yes, it's all automated. You just click a button, says I want to shard. You
Yeah.
pick the number of shards, and then we just do the rest. And voila.
Yeah. Okay. So do we want to show folks what that looks like in Atlas?
Yeah, that
Okay.
never hurts. I think a demo
Yeah.
is always a good thing, in my opinion.
Okay. So I'm going to share my screen, and we'll jump into let's see, database deployments. I'll share my window. Now
All
I
right.
have a couple of clusters launched, but none of them meet the requirements to shard. Talk about the requirements. What's the size of the cluster that you need to launch in order to implement sharding?
Yeah, so on Atlas, due to there are certain sizes where sharding is just not necessary, and so what we've said is that you need at least an M30 replica set instance size in order to have a sharded cluster,
Okay.
and that's really the only requirement that we have, that your machines are at least an M30, right?
Okay.
And so the instance sizes we have start from really M0 to M700. Let's say if you're on AWS, so an
Mhm.
M30 is like the fourth biggest machine essentially. So
Okay.
if you scroll down
Yep. So we're
from
going to go
there.
into dedicated.
Dedicated.
Right. We'll leave global cluster alone for the moment, and I'll scroll all the way down, leaving all of the defaults,
Yes.
and I'll
So right
select my
here,
tier.
you have the right tier. So you have an M30. So that's fine. And then you go to, more options or something below that, additional settings.
Okay.
And then there you should see something says shard your cluster. And it
Okay.
tells you that's M30 and up. And then there you click on that drop down. You can pick the number of shards. Anywhere from 1 to 50 is what we let you pick in
Wow.
the UI.
Okay.
If you need
Yeah.
more than that, that's also fine. You just need to talk to us, because at that point we need to make sure that you're not doing anything crazy.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah.
Yeah. That's a lot. That's massive scale. And I want to
Yeah.
draw attention to the hourly down here, the hourly rate that is charged. Now, if I were to turn it off, right, it would be an M30 is approximately, with the default configuration, approximately 59 cents per hour. But if I turn on sharding, and let's go with 3 shards, it goes up to 237 per hour. Now explain why that is. What's going on there?
Yeah. So sharding, the way it works is that, like I said, we automate everything for you. So the MongoOS is a stateless system, so you don't need a separate machine for that. But really, it's 3 shards plus the config server shard. The config server itself is a shard or replica set, and that's also an M30, right? So really, what you're paying here is the cost for 4 M30s, 3 M30 shards, and an M30 config server.
Okay,
and so
gotcha.
those should add up to about 237, right? Which is 4 times the replica set.
Okay,
Minus some little traffic.
That makes sense. Any other configuration that we need to take note of if we're going to just implement sharding today?
No, just the storage. For example, I think it was like at 10 gigs for the M30, your default settings. Maybe we want to add a little bit more there, or 40 gigs it was. But outside of that, no, I think we're pretty good.
Okay. Yep. And I kind of like the way it updates in real time. What's your estimated? That's pretty spot on, right? I mean, the estimated, that tends to be pretty true. Yeah. Okay. Are there other factors that can impact the total amount that we end up paying for our cluster?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things there. The storage, the scaling, if you go up in instance size automatically or not, for example, with the auto scale. If you provision more IOPS than the dedicated IOPS that you were given. If you add, certain types of backup, or, additional settings like BI and so on. But network transfer costs are also the other ones that don't really show up here.
Yeah. And where does network transfer costs come in? What might impact that? Like, what are some of the activities?
So the availability zone, where you put your shards, where you put your config server, right? Where you put each node, right? Essentially, the data transfer cost is the cost it takes to move data between any 2 nodes, right? And, those are fairly cheap, but they can add up. For example, imagine you had a shard in Australia and then a shard in New York. You can see how that cost of transferring data would be much higher than compared to if you had a shard in Virginia and one in Ohio.
Yeah.
Right. Or 2 shards in Virginia.
Yeah. Okay. So I did click deploy. I'm probably not going to leave this up for very long, but let's let it deploy. And we notice that it's deploying 0 of 9 servers. That's because I chose a 3-node, 2-shard system. Why is it 9 servers? Is
Correct. So
one?
you have,
Go ahead.
yes, you have 3 nodes for each shard. So that's 6 nodes. And then the config server is 3 more nodes, right? Because that's a replica
Okay.
set. That's 9
Okay.
total servers.
Oh, great.
And the
Okay,
thing,
so the config server runs in a resilient manner as well.
correct. Yes. It used to be a single thing. Obviously, we realized that was not a good idea. So, yes, we turned that also into a replica set to give it high availability, because if that's the source of truth for your data, you also want to make sure that's resilient.
Yeah, yeah, great. Okay, so an unrelated question from Shivam. He's asking about how to get support. Where do we send people if they have questions?
Yes, normally I'd say the forums, the MongoDB forums, is probably the best place
Mm-hmm.
to sort of mention that, and then from there it makes its way to the relevant folks.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Hope that answers your question. And other folks joining, please feel free to go ahead and ask questions. We're focusing on sharding specifically, but more generally, scalability and resilience in MongoDB. And we're kind of focusing on MongoDB Atlas, our cloud deployments. That's where you focus, right, Garodi?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we're deploying. That's going to take a little while for our servers to deploy. What else do folks need to know about sharding?
Yeah, I think that a couple of things, depending on which version you are, that differs. And we released MongoDB 6.0 recently. So the thing we've been working on from a sharding standpoint is that sharding is complex. As you see, I mentioned quite a few more pieces compared to a replica set. And so these are things you need to know that you don't need to know for replica set. You just spin up MongoDB. Whereas in sharding, for example, even knowing that a config server exists or that a MongoS exists and how many you need and so on, those are things, if you're on-prem, for example, you need to think about. On Atlas, we sort of automate a lot of that, but those are the first things to keep in mind. Our job has been, from a product standpoint, is how to make that experience of sharding as smooth as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And so removing all the layers of complexities. For example, when you have your sharded cluster, you need to shard your data. You need to shard collections, right? We shard at a collection level at MongoDB. So if you have, 100 collections, you need to shard all 100, for example. And for those, you need to figure out how you're going to partition, as you mentioned before. You're going to partition each collection, right? And we call that selecting a shard key. So you say, hey, which field in my collection am I going to distribute the data over? So that's not a thing that is trivial, because it has a lot of pros and cons depending on what you pick.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Okay. Now, so we've launched this cluster,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll kind of keep an eye on it as we're chatting. But I think it's probably going to take a good
About
maybe
10 minutes, I think.
7 to 10 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah.
That deployment is happening in parallel, right? We're not deploying those servers in series.
Correct. It depends, but yes.
Okay. All right. Now, once we get that up, I'm gonna want to get as close to possible as demoing this. Are we going to need a command line? How are we going to be able to configure the sharding?
Yeah, so it depends. If you have data, you need to load data into the cluster first.
Okay.
Yeah, and that is, you load however you load data in MongoDB. That's the same way you do that.
Mm-hmm.
And normally, if it'll load data in an uncharted collection. So with that, every database has a primary shard that we call it, which is the replica set or the shard where all the uncharted collections live. So you would upload data on that database on that shard. And then once you've done that, we would look at that collection and pick a shard key for it. Or if you have multiple collections, pick a shard key for each. And then sharding will just kick in once you've done that. And that needs to happen in the command line or in Compass or, in the shell or something.
Yeah. So would we use the Atlas command line API for that?
Yeah, you could do that. I normally just use the shell myself.
The query?
But
Yeah, the shell.
yeah.
Mongosh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or Compass if you like something slightly more visually appealing. But up to you.
Okay.
They all do the same thing, in my opinion.
Okay. So while we're deploying, do we have any questions from the viewers? I think we're still having problems with LinkedIn. Doesn't look like we're going to go live on LinkedIn today. That's kind of a bummer. But if you're watching on YouTube, let us know who you are, where you're from, what your level of experience with MongoDB, with sharding is. And if you've got any questions, we're here for you. So, and also while we're waiting, I'll give a little pitch to folks to check out the MongoDB podcast. Plenty of content, very similar to what we're talking about today. If you're interested in MongoDB, If you're interested in software engineering data, there are plenty of guests on the MongoDB podcast talking about stuff like that. So visit mongodb.com/podcast. And I'm kind of regretting not deploying this earlier.
Yeah.
It's still deploying. So
figure you got some secret cluster stashed already.
Yeah, I have a 10. I didn't have an M30. But let's see. Okay, what else should we look at while we're waiting? Maybe some docs or any other resources that we should be sharing with folks?
Yeah, so I think the sharding docs are fairly comprehensive. I think we have a few talks. I think we mentioned one last time about demystifying sharding, for example. Also have a talk on live resharding that I gave a couple of years ago now that I think will be very interesting. I know we're going to talk about that today, but I think that would be one worth checking out.
Okay. All right. It's a great article. Sanika Fans wrote this. I'm going to add this. And this is an article that actually references a YouTube video. I wonder if I can share my sound. Can folks hear this? Can you hear that?
Nope.
No. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, so I'm going to put this. Yeah, I know. Thank you, Jesse. LinkedIn has not connected for some reason. So Jesse, Code Stacker, is letting me know that LinkedIn's not working in the comments. I'm going to drop a link to that article that we just shared. You can read more about demystifying sharding. Let's see if I can't get LinkedIn up and running. Yep. Doesn't look like it's going to work. All right, so here's that article. MongoDB.com/blog/post. Demystifying sharding. And if you just search for demystifying sharding, that'll come up. And note that there's the article, which will explain things as well as the actual video. So, all right. The demo gods are not with us today.
Sometimes it happens.
Okay. So if you've got questions, let us know in the chat. And let's check on our server deployment. Shared demo, it's up. All right. So let's take a look at this. So here we have our shared demo cluster. It's an M30. And we don't have any data, so we're going to probably want to deploy that, right? Maybe deploy the sample.
Yeah, I think that's
sample data sets are great. So if you're new to MongoDB and you're curious about what some document databases look like, great way to do that is to find your cluster once you've deployed it, click the ellipsis and select load sample data set. This is also going to take a couple minutes to deploy, but you'll get about 7-8 different collections that really represent a good mix of document database types. So in there, let's see if I have them in another cluster. I should have them in my performance cluster. Sample supplies is one. You can take a look at that one while we're waiting. Okay, the size of my display is kind of making this difficult, but I hope that's not too small for folks. But here you see a sales document database of sales items. We've got some embedding going on. And since we only have one collection, we're not really doing any referencing. So this would be a really great database to work with right out of the gate. You can see some good examples of different data types. We've got Boolean, we've got floating point, we've got string, of course, and then we've got object types. So if you're coming to MongoDB from the relational world, it might be a little new to you, although some modern relational databases let you store JSON in them, but this is what JSON looks like. So let's head back and take a look. We'll go into our new cluster that we deployed, and here are the sample data types. So now the first step in sharding is choosing an index type, right?
Yes. So for sharding, the shard key is a special index, really, is what it is.
Mhm.
So in order to have a shard key, you need to have an index on that field.
Okay.
And so what we would say is, once you've identified the field that you want to pick as your shard key, depending on which collection we're looking at, then you'd have to create an index for that field. And so maybe, what's the largest collection you have here?
Let's see. I think geospatial is pretty large.
So,
let's take a look at geospatial. It's only about 3 meg.
yeah,
Let's take a
let's
look
check
at
Airbnb
analytics.
or the movies. I think IMDb or Airbnb usually.
Okay, it's
big
about
enough.
90 meg in Airbnb.
Yeah.
And it's one collection, nice and simple.
Let's take a look at it. Okay, so Airbnb, for example, you have _ID, listing URL, name, so on. And so any of those fields could be selected as a shard key as long as it has an underlying index. And so what you would do is figure out which field you want to shard on and create an index for it. Now, index creation takes a while. So I'd say we just go to _ID for this demo since that already exists as an index.
Okay.
But normally, yes, I would just say create index on that field in the shell or compass. And then once that index is done being created, it would show up here under indexes. We'll see there are quite a few here. So any of those 4 could be selected as a shard key since they already have.
Now, selection of the actual field to index on and to shard on is really critical. What are some of the factors that people are going to want to consider when they choose a shard key?
Yeah, so the first one, there are around 4 factors, I think. The first one is around cardinality. Cardinality just says how many distinct values are there in the shard key. So for example, if you're looking at Airbnb, let's go back to the list of fields in the listings and reviews. So folks can see that if you look at it, for example, room type, right? That may only be either entire home or room, and that's it. That would have a cardinality of 2 since there are only 2 options. Or maybe property type only has like 4: house, apartment, condo, and farm, barn, or something. I don't know, but those don't have too many distinct values to pick from, right? Even same with number of bedrooms, for example. A house can only have so many bedrooms. Let's say most houses are 10 or fewer, so that would have a cardinality of 10 or less, right? And so you'd want to stay away from those fields that have low cardinality, low number of distinct values.
What about country?
Yeah, so there are about 230 countries, let's say, if give or take. But the thing is that that's not bad for cardinality. But the thing is that not every country has the same amount of Airbnb. So as much as that has cardinality, it does not have the same distribution of folks that are hosting. For example, countries are different sizes. So the US is a huge country with a population of 300 million people, right? China has over 1 billion, India also. So those may have way more Airbnbs than a country like Portugal that we're looking at. And so as much as there are different options there, right? Or even the country where I'm from, Haiti, with only 10 million people, we might have way fewer Airbnbs, for example, than even Portugal or the US or China. Right. And so as much as country has high cardinality, what it does not have is give you the ability to have even distribution of your data or your workload, because some countries have way more Airbnbs than others, or some countries have way more people that take Airbnbs that stay in them compared to other countries. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's a problem there.
Yeah. So the goal here is to distribute your data across the number of shards that you have.
Yes. But not just that, really. The data is a proxy for distributing your traffic. Right. And so you can have even data distribution like you would for country, but not every country has the same amount of stays and amount of traffic on Airbnb's platform. So that may be a good shard key cardinality wise, but and data distribution wise, but not traffic wise. Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
So that's the key. Distributing your data along the lines of the query as well as
Yes.
the size of the data.
Yes. And country, for example, wouldn't even do that well for data, right? You could think about it if the US has 100 million listings and Portugal has 10 million, you have a shard with Portugal and a shard with USA, right? Those shards would have uneven number of data because the US would just have way more documents in that collection compared to Portugal.
Yeah. So would ID? I mean, this is a contrived ID. It's not a natural object ID, but would a natural object ID, which pretty much represents a random number?
Yep. So underscore ID is always a great one because it meets the cardinality requirements no matter what. If it's random, then it's great. If it's not and it's monotonically increasing, that the one issue there is that every new write goes to the latest shard, right? So every time you create a new document, a new listing, and so on, right, that ID would be the latest ID, and that would always be on the latest shard, if that makes sense. And so if you want to create, a million new listings, they would all have to go on the new shard, and then the auto balancer would kick in and move stuff around. And so that's the one caveat there. So I think if ID is random or a random field is always good as a shard key, or if ID is not random, then you could just create a hash index on it and hash it and use the hash of ID as a shard key. That would also give you the even distribution for inserts, for example.
Okay, great. So that's a good overview. I think I'd love to be able to demo creating a shard key. It's going to require that I jump in and do some access control, which is probably going to be boring while I do that behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Let's see.
So yeah, but to finish the shard key piece off, right? So there's cardinality, like I said, which is how many unique values does the field have? And then there's about, distributing your read or your write distribution, depending on what you care about, or both, right? So for example, like I was saying, the write distribution, if you're trying to create a bunch of listings every day, right? You don't want all those to go to the same shard. You want to distribute that across all the shards. For your read, same thing. If you want to have a lot of reads, you want to make sure that they're targeted to different shards, depending on what you're reading. But also you want to have read locality if you can, right? And read targeting. And so what that means is that, let's say I wanted to say, give me all the bookings in the past week. You may want all those to be on the same shard so that you're not, looking at all the shards. If you have 100 shards, trying to get the listings from the past week from all the shards to merge them together will take a little bit longer. And so it may be better to set up your shard key in a way so that you target, just a shard for that. So I think that's the hard part about selecting a shard key. Depending on your read and write patterns, a shard key may be great or not. And the beauty of all of this is also that if, for example, you had a field like country that has low cardinality, you could combine it with timestamp, for example, date of last booking or something like that, to get more cardinality that way, right? So within each country, then you'd have a bunch of bookings, and you could hash that, make that random, so that you get even more data to distribute over. Because before MongoDB 6.0, we sort of chunk the data up, distribute the data into chunks, and then make sure that there's an evenness of chunks across the entire cluster. Starting in MongoDB 6.0, we just distribute by the data size. So we make sure that each shard has the same amount of data as opposed to number of chunks.
Okay, makes sense. Okay, so I've added a user and I've created a network rule. I can share that. Let's see. Window. Okay, so what I did was I went to my sharded demo, my shared demo, and I went into database access. There's plenty of users here, but I created one called sharded demo. Okay, I added a built-in rule for read write any database, and I created a password there. And then I went to network access and I added, these are all the places I've demoed from, but I added my current IP address to this this table of IP addresses that are allowed to access. We used to call it a whitelist. Don't use that term anymore. But that's this is the network access table. So we should be set
allow
there.
List, as they call
allow
it.
List. Thank you. Very good. Yes. Okay. So I'm going to remove that, and I'm going to reshare my terminal window. Stop screen and present. Share screen window and terminal. Where's my terminal? Okay, and here I am connected. You'll see up here I connected and passed that password to my sharded demo, and you can see my databases. And if I use sample Airbnb, show collections, and I can do a simple query, db.listings and reviews. Maybe if I spelled it right. So there's our data. Did a simple find. Okay, so I'm connected. Where would we go next to begin?
Yes. So before we shard the collection, because we don't
Mhm.
have that much data, I
Mhm.
think we should reduce the chunk size so that we can actually split the
Ooh.
data
Oh man.
evenly.
Okay, we're getting into it.
Yeah, and so I can just show how to do sharding after that. So let's just do that up front. Normally, you wouldn't have to do that if you have enough data, right? But basically, let's go to the config database. So use config, and then I pasted the command for the update one to change the chunk size in the config database.
Private. Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, and we're gonna set a chunk size of 10 megabytes just to make sure we divide that data into a bunch of different chunks.
Okay, so settings is a collection in the config database. So I'm saying db.settings.update1, setting the chunk size. That is a document, right? Is that a document? Setting the update one. Oh no, this is the find. So okay, so the ID of chunk size. We're going to set the value of 10. Okay, great. And we're going to say
do an upsert. Yes.
Okay. So for some reason that's pasting funny. There we go. Did I paste it twice? Let's see. I think I did. Copy it again. I think it's just there we go. Okay. Authorized to execute config. Oh, maybe I don't have proper authorization.
You don't. You're not an admin.
Okay. So I'll bet folks are going to experience something similar. So let's edit this guy. And I'm going to change the built-in role.
Yeah, just to owner or something. I think that's fine.
Atlas admin. Will that do it?
It should.
Okay. Let's try that. Now that has to distribute across the server. And I bet I probably have to log out. No? Maybe not.
From the shell, yeah, probably.
Let's try it.
Doesn't hurt.
Yeah. Here we go.
Perfect. So yeah, so that lowered the chunk size to 10 megabytes, which I do not recommend, but just for demo purposes, since we have so little data, we just want to show the process of sharding.
Yep.
Yeah, the default chunk size is 128 megabytes, and so we only had like 300 megabytes, so it may not, distribute anything, and so that's why we wanted to do that. And so now we're going to essentially shard the collection. So in MongoDB 5.0, which I think is the version you're on, right? Yes, 5.014. You need to first do enable sharding.
Okay. You going to give me the cheat codes?
Yes. So let me. It's just sh.enable sharding, and then on the database, which is what did we call that database? Sample Airbnb or yeah. Okay, that also works. So what was it? Sample Airbnb we were doing? Yeah. So it's sh.enable sharding sample Airbnb.
I don't know that I'm familiar with this. sh.enable.
Sharding.
Starting with a capital S, right?
S, yeah. Yes. Oh, sorry. sh.enable sharding, open parentheses, and then the name of the database. Yeah, no space between enable sharding. Yeah. And then I think quotes, sample Airbnb needs to be in quotes.
Okay. right. Looks like it's okay.
All right. So, let's switch back databases from config to use sample Airbnb.
So the context needs to be set.
The enable sharding shouldn't, but to shard the collection, yes. Yeah, it doesn't hurt to run it again. Nothing. Yeah, if it works, it works. So
Yep.
Cool. So yeah, so sharding's been enabled on that database called sample Airbnb. MongoDB 6.0, you don't have to do that anymore. Just like, what's the point if you're going to shard a collection? Why
Right.
mention enable sharding? So we basically made that a no-op. And now we're going to shard the collection we're picking on. So let's go back to the UI, maybe on Atlas, just to see the collection one more time.
Okay. Let's do stop screen, present, share screen, window. Okay. And we'll go back to our cluster. Okay.
So we're going to shard the listings and reviews collection. There's only one that database. And we said we're going to do it on underscore ID.
Yeah.
Right. And underscore ID is random, I believe, MongoDB generated. So that is fine to just say ID.
Okay.
So, okay. So we see that an index exists for underscore ID. So that's good. So now we know we can shard on that. So now we can go back in the shell.
All right.
And shard an underscore ID.
Okay. Window. Okay, there we go.
Yeah, so it would be sh dot shard collection, open parentheses, quotes. You need the database name, I believe, even if you're there. So it would be what is it called? Listings Airbnb dot, and then sample Airbnb. Or is that the name of the database?
Oh, in comma?
Yeah, so first the name of the database, I forgot what it was called.
Oh, it's called sample
listings and reviews or something.
Airbnb is the database.
Okay, yes, that's right. And then you can put database name dot, so sample Airbnb dot, yes, collection names, then close that, and then comma, and then open bracket. Not bracket, the squiggly one. What is that called?
Oh,
yes.
Yeah, curly brace.
So now curly brace, got it. Yes, and then now the field that we want to use as the shard key, so underscore ID, or just ID. Forget
quotes.
No, nothing. Just the field name, and then colon 1, close curly braces, and then close parentheses. And hit go. Let's see.
All right. Wow. Well, we got an okay.
Cool. So now run sh.status just to see what's going on. And then you need the bracket, the parentheses. Yeah.
All
so
right.
Now let's scroll up so we can see everything that it's done.
Guides, special.
Yeah, it shows for every collection. But,
okay, so where is Airbnb?
So let's scroll all the way at the top, right after sh status. Keep going. Keep going up.
Oh, there we go.
All the way up.
Yep.
Okay. So, all right. So as you can see, it shows you shard key underscore ID1. Is it unique? No. Is balancing true? Yes. And then it tells you here, as you can see, right, there are 5 chunks on shard 0 and 4 chunks on shard 1. So it's telling you that it's distributed it already. Wow. And then it tells you what the key is, right? Underscore ID, what the min and max key is for each chunk. And so that's an easy way to see. But now in the Atlas UI, you can actually go see this to see if it's distributed. So I think that's a good place I always check visually.
Okay. Tell me where to go.
Yes. So back to Atlas.
Oh, I got to share my screen. Hang on.
Yes.
Switch out. Let's go back. Share screen window. Okay, there we go.
So now, if you go to metrics,
All right.
next to collections at the top, yeah,
Collections,
left,
metrics. Okay, yep.
so you see where it says display,
Let's see.
display query.
Yes.
Right here. Yes, click on that. Let us know what you see, and scroll all the way down. Let me know if you see chunks.
Oh, okay. Oh, you can't see that actually. Okay.
No.
So I see page faults, oplog,
You see
tickets,
chunks all the way
replication,
down.
chunks all the way at the bottom. Okay.
Yeah. So it's going to take a while to show up here, but and then switch collection from config.system.sessions. You should see the collection you sharded here in the UI.
Okay.
Like I said, it may take a little time to show up, but there should only be 2 options if you sharded a collection.
Okay. Display chunks. It only gives me the config.system.sessions collection.
Got it. It just hasn't shown up yet in the UI.
Gotcha.
That's all. So that's normally where I would see the number of chunks for the collection that's there.
Okay.
And so maybe change the zoom from 2 months to like, an hour or something like that. But
Gotcha.
eventually in a little bit, it will show up. As you can see, config.system.sessions, it's also a sessions collection. Not relevant necessarily for this, but this we have to split the sessions collection across the shards. It's sort of a thing that we use to manipulate data behind the scenes. But every collection that you shard will show up here under the chunks display. And then in 6.0, we actually show not just number of chunks per collection, but the amount of data per collection and the number of documents per collection.
Gotcha.
And so that can tell you about, for example, when we're talking about distributing by chunks versus data size, you could see there are examples where the number of chunks are even, but the data sizes are different because, the US chunk is much larger than the Portugal chunk. And so that tells you they have even chunk distribution, but not even data distribution.
Okay.
So you would be able to see that in the UI. So we would upgrade to 6.0 to go see all of that. But for now, let's go back to the shell for a second.
All right.
Since it says it's worked. Another way of seeing it, there's a command called get shard distribution that can do the same thing. And then I think we can just, once we've shown that things are there, we can run resharding and change the shard key and explain that. So let me paste that command for you.
Okay,
So
get something.
So change that to the so change that to the
sample
database
Airbnb.
name.
Yep.
Correct. And then that to the collection name, which is
then
the collection that we sharded.
Things and reviews. Okay. All right.
So what do you see?
I see. Oh, yeah, there you go. So you've got data. You've got 2,467 documents in shard 0 and 5,555 documents in shard 1. Okay. Interesting. And then the totals. So we've got total documents 8,000. The documents. Oh, I see. Okay, so there was the total data size of 134 meg, and it's distributed as 44 meg in shard 0 and 90 meg in shard 1. So it looks like it's actually working.
Yeah. Seems to have over moved data on shard 0, but I think when you're at small sizes, that's the one issue there. But normally the balancer basically tries to have that as even number of chunks. As you can see here, because one has 5 chunks, one has 4 chunks. That is a case where the balancer says, hey, MongoDB is balanced by number of chunks. But if you look at data size, you clearly see it's not balanced by data size. So if you upgrade to 6.0, we would actually sort of, change the chunking and make sure that it's evenly distributed if possible. But here, I think this is as small as the data gets. Like I said, we're working with small data. So it might just be able to say there's no data to move to get more even than that, but we know it's not even. Whereas in 5.0, for all intents and purposes, number of chunks are even because, one has 4, one has 5. You can't, it doesn't matter if you move 5 to 4. And so let's say it's even here, even though 2/3 of the data lives on shard 1, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Okay. Makes sense.
Now I think this is a good time to reshard this collection. And
Yeah,
first,
right
let me
on.
just preface by saying normally before 5.0, resharding had two different options, right? You bring your database offline, you do a dump, reshard offline, and then reload it with the new shard key, which involves a lot of downtime, right? Hours of
Mhm.
downtime, maybe
Yep.
up to a day or more, depending on how much data you have. Or you do a thing called, some complex migration where you basically have another cluster on the side. You're duplicating writes and reads of both clusters. You're mirroring everything. Then you have the other cluster with the new shard key, and then once it's sort of caught up, you do the switch over there, and move your connection straight to the new cluster, etc. Very
Most
complicated
likely
stuff.
downtime, right?
Yeah, that one technically is online, but you mess something up, you lose data, you corrupt data, so it's even
Yeah.
riskier in that point, right? And so that's why we brought in live resharding for 5.0. Say, hey, we'll just do all that for you, right? And so
Yeah.
let's run that, and then I'll explain how it works.
Okay. Where are we going from the command line?
Yes, everything's on the command line. Eventually, we will add all that in the UI, so you can just click some buttons. But for now, it's about making sure the functionality exists, right? So
Yep.
we're already in the database that we want to reshard. So I guess first, maybe let's go back to Atlas for a second and find a new key that we
Okay.
want to reshard on.
Okay.
And this
Let's do
one,
that.
I think we can just pick any random one. Doesn't have to be a good shard key or anything. We just want to demonstrate that we're able to reshard a collection with the database.
Yep. Okay.
And so
maybe
pick whichever
country
one,
or
whatever
yeah.
field you want. Yeah, I think country was an array, right? Or no? So
I think
what
it was
fields would
an
it be?
object of
I don't know if it was address.country or something.
amenities image address dot country.
Oh, deal. Yeah. So yes. And by the way, resharding will automatically create the index for you if it doesn't exist, if you reshard on the field. So that one, you don't need to have an existing index to reshard on. Resharding will just check if it exists and create it.
Okay. So I'm just showing you that there's no index on address.country, and we're going to shard on address.country. Okay. So it's lowercase address, lowercase country. Now I'm going to jump back to the shell. And let's go share screen, window. Okay, here we are in sample Airbnb.
So it's going to be sh.reshard collection with the database name .collection name like we did before. So what was it? Sample Airbnb .collection name. And then comma, open curly brackets, the field that you want to reshard on. So in this case,
address.
And then :1, let's say.
That's for, is that the index direction?
Yes. So the 1 is just hash or not, right? Ascending or descending. So 1 is ascending index versus hash, you could say also if you wanted there.
Okay.
And then that's it. That should work.
Okay. Token, unexpected.
It says address.country. Is that the...
Perhaps this. Cardinality. Oh, interesting.
Yes, you see. So there are not enough countries in that database. So let's go pick another field.
Okay.
But you see, we do have some checks to protect you from picking a bad shard key. So I'm kind of glad we dealt with that. We say, hey, there's not enough cardinality there for that to be a good shard key to reshard on. And
okay.
So before we run,
so what's got good cardinality?
So let's see here.
Name.
Anything with a lot of words, right? Like, yeah, name probably does. So let's just do name.
All right. So here we go. Sorry for the switching back and forth, folks. I hope this is making sense. If you have questions along the way, please feel free to drop them in the comments. We'll try and get to those. Okay, I'm going to share my terminal. All right. And so we're going to change this to, looks like you have to have it quoted as well. So that was name, top level.
It shouldn't be quoted. It shouldn't have to be quoted.
No? Okay.
I'll be surprised. No.
Let's test you. Name was a top level document field, right?
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
And that's it. It's running.
Oh,
that's why. So now if you opened another, Mongosh into the same thing, you could do a find one. You'd be able to see that you can still read and write to your database, or even an update one if you wanted. while resharding is happening. This one should be pretty quick. Like I think the minimum we said is 5 minutes, so it's going to take 5 minutes still. But even though it would finish faster than that. But
Okay.
yeah, while this is happening, your database is still up. You can still read and write to that collection or to any other collection, right? So the
Okay.
way we
Wow.
work, the way it works right now, what's happening is we clone the existing collection into a new collection and do that with the new shard key.
Mm.
And then we make sure that we're copying the reads and writes that are happening to the collection to the new collection also, right? And once we've sufficiently caught up with, a time difference of 2 seconds or less, then we do a switch over to the new collection and then resharding completes. So the minimum
Wow.
time we set for resharding is 5 minutes, no matter how much data you have. So this one will take 5 minutes, then resharding complete. Then you do a SH status, and then you see that the shard key is now name instead of underscore ID like it was before.
Okay. Great.
And that's it. It's as smooth as that.
Beautiful. Well, we just made history. I've never sharded, let alone resharded a cluster on a live stream, at least. So
I'm glad it worked, and
too.
we got to demo also some things not to do, like pick a
Yeah.
bad shard key to reshard on. Right?
Yeah.
And so we put some built-in protections there. As much as it give you a lot of flexibility, we also want to make sure you don't shoot yourself in the foot where possible.
Okay.
Yes.
So before we end the stream, I want to give you the opportunity to give folks any other advice about sharding, about resharding, anything they should watch out for.
Yeah, so I think the part for resharding, there are a couple requirements, right? First, because we clone the collection that exists, make sure you have enough spare storage in your cluster to have a proxy, a side collection while it's happening, right? Once it's done, we delete the old collection, but you need at least temporarily to have that spare storage available to copy that, right? And also, if while we're doing the copying, because we're doing more reads and writes, obviously, than your cluster has, make sure you have enough spare capacity, whether it's spare CPU utilization, IOPS, and so on, to handle resharding. If you don't, just increase the instance size. That usually is all it takes, and then you should see no impact to your application whatsoever if that happens, right?
Gotcha.
And so those are the recommendations there. Just increase an instance size if you are above 50% utilization for any of the things you care about. Make sure you have enough spare storage, and then just run resharding. And depending on how much data you have, a terabyte takes about half a day. 2 terabytes takes a day, and so on, almost slightly sublinearly in terms of how long it takes. But it also depends on the number of shards, right? So the first part is that it takes time to read the entire collection the first time, and then after that, we sort of split it across the shards and do things in parallel. But the first reading time is linear to the number of the amount of data we're reading. But yeah, it's as smooth as that. You don't need much more than that on Atlas to reshard.
Outstanding. Okay, so I want to point folks to the docs. The docs are fantastic, by the way. The folks at the docs team in MongoDB, really top notch. So there's you can Google. The SEO is pretty good on the docs. It's indexed pretty well. But you can visit mongodb.com/docs, and you can do a search there for sharding. It's under configure additional settings. You'll know you're in the right place. And then recommendation, when you deploy a cluster in MongoDB Atlas today, it defaults to version 5.0. The latest is version 6.0, which is GA.
Yes.
And you probably want to do that because there's some enhancements around efficiency in sharding when you deploy and upgrade to MongoDB 6.0. Right at the hour. Man, this is professional work here, Garudi.
Thanks.
Any last questions from the folks, from the viewers? Looks like we're losing folks at the hour. I think we're in good shape. Garudi, thanks so much for spending time with me and helping me understand sharding, scalability, resilience. We've got another couple of these coming up. What's next in the list? Do you recall?
That I do know. I think it's around resilience and high availability, if I'm not mistaken.
Outstanding. Looking forward to that. Garudi, thanks so much. Have a great day.
Of course, you too, Michael. All right.
Yep.